Greetings class and welcome to the lecture session for Unit 2 or Module 2. Rather for the course, we're going to take a quick look at ideas related to conceptualizing health services research, particularly those ideas that pertain to our lesson for this week when you're going to be looking at an in the news assignment that is related to different areas or purposes for health services research. Likewise, determinants of health. So we are going to look at those factors in this quick lecture video, and hopefully it'll be able to help you to answer some of those questions as you move forward in the module. So the first thing we're going to look at is the overall purpose of health services research, which basically falls into three different categories. One is for exploration, two is for description, and then three is for explanation. And I'm going to take a deeper dive into each of these aspects as I go along in the presentation. First, let's take a look at what exploratory research is all about. So this research is basically done when there's little known about a subject matter or a particular phenomenon. So we're trying to figure out what's going on. In which case, we are going to look at this information or this phenomenon very objectively, usually not going to come to the table with a whole lot of hypotheses and thought processes beforehand in relation to what's going on, because we're trying to figure it out, and we understand that those types of things create bias. There's a time and place for a hypothesis for sure. However, in exploratory research, this is not the case. Instead, we're just trying to figure out what is happening in a given situation, okay? Typically, this is how we actually derive our hypothesis, is by first doing exploratory research when we don't know too much about a subject matter. Most discoveries are made through this particular process. So when you think about exploratory research, we are asking what is going on, all right? An example of this would be, what is coronavirus? When the virus was new, before we had what we know today as COVID-19, there was a space in which humans did not really understand the mechanism of action with coronavirus. And it was also previous to this particular epidemic, because coronavirus has been around for quite some time now. It's just now that we have this pandemic that the whole world, right, has basically focused on this particular infectious disease state. However, this mechanism has been known for multiple years, but scientists had to come to a space of understanding what coronavirus is, what type of infectious organism is surrounding it, how does it infect people, how does it harm people, how can you treat it, things of that nature. So that's what exploratory research is about. The next type of research is descriptive research. So descriptive research is just like it sounds. We are basically summarizing the characteristics of something in particular, whether we are researching an individual, a group, a full-on organization or community, a certain event, situation, circumstance, etc. We are trying to basically describe everything that's going on. Well, I won't say everything. We're trying to describe the nuts and bolts of that situation based on the specific area of research that we are targeting. So this helps us to categorize information and to break things down so that we can study it more systematically. This particular type of research is very much so structured, systematic. We go in with a purpose and we want to come out basically with our how types of questions. So how did this happen? An example related to the coronavirus would be, how did coronavirus become a pandemic? So in this case, we are describing the mechanism of actions, or the mechanisms of action rather, that occurred for us to get from coronavirus being this little known disease state that only impacted a handful of people around the world every year, to it becoming a worldwide infectious disease state that has killed a number of people and caused many other people to become very, very ill and or injured at some point. The last type, or the last purpose rather, for public health research would be for explanatory purposes. So we are basically in the process of explaining a phenomenon at this stage. We are seeking answers to absolutely define hypotheses and problems or statements that we want to investigate more so. Okay. Here's when you start to do a lot of the experimentation, and usually we're looking at multiple variables, at least two variables in explanatory research. We're usually not just looking at one phenomenon occurring at this particular point. This type of research basically asks the why or what will be type of question. So we're getting a whole lot deeper into understanding a phenomenon at this particular case, this particular level rather. So an example going along with the coronavirus example would be is what would be the impact of COVID-19 on unborn babies to infected pregnant women. So this is a kind of cause and effect. If you notice here, I used the word COVID-19 versus coronavirus because at first we were looking at coronavirus. It wasn't COVID-19 in that space when we were trying to figure out what it was, right? Or even we were trying to figure out the mechanisms of action because it had mutated at that stage. But now we're digging deep into a very, very specific phenomenon, and we're trying to determine a causal relationship here, in which case we're trying to figure out, how would this COVID-19 affect some unborn children when a mother is pregnant with them and is exposed or actually infected by this disease state. So I hope that gives you a deeper understanding of the different layers or purposes behind why we do public health or public services research. Now, I'm going to take a quick look at the things that we typically explore when we are trying to understand why an individual is healthy versus disease, in which case we call these things determinants of health, the things that will determine if a person is healthy or not. Some examples of determinants of health include the following. So lifestyle factors, that's going to be the biggest component, right? We look at a disease state like coronavirus, as we stated earlier. Obviously, everyone didn't get impacted by it. There were some people who got affected as soon as it became a pandemic, or even before it was even declared a pandemic. And there's some people who never ever got coronavirus whatsoever. So we would look at things like lifestyle, what causes one individual to get that disease state versus another. Socio-cultural factors that are involved in it. So what is that person's ideology? So we're talking about culture, we're talking about the way an individual thinks, especially when it comes to interacting within a community of other people who think the same way. That can and absolutely does impact health status. And utilizing coronavirus, a pandemic that impacted the entire globe, is a perfect example of looking at socio-cultural factors, because then we can see why some places were hit by coronavirus more so than other places based on the ideologies of the people groups in those particular areas, in certain countries, certain regions of certain countries, etc. Socioeconomic factors, so that has to do with things like finances, as well as education, the availability of housing to certain people groups, things of that nature. Psychosocial factors, so this has to do with your mental health and well-being, especially as it relates to communal dynamics and how you interact with other people. So how healthy are you mentally, especially from a social perspective? And then also environmental factors. What is going on out in the environment that has maybe nothing at all to do with the human dynamic itself that is impacting a specific disease state or phenomenon that's going on within the community? All of these factors are things that we can and often do look at when we conduct public services research. So these are things that you want to think about as you work through the in the news activity for this week. With that being said, I'm going to go ahead and close up this mini lecture session, and I hope it was helpful for you. Please feel free to reach out to me if you have any questions, comments, or concerns. Thanks, guys.